March 1977. Hollywood, California. Motown Recording Studios. A six-piece band from Tuskegee, Alabama, has been working on their fifth album. 9 years into their career. 9 years of touring arenas. 9 years of graduating from opening act to headliner. 9 years of playing funk so hard the floor moved. But something different is happening on this record. They have not named it yet. They are just calling it the next album. In America, it will ship as the Commodores, the self-titled record, a statement of identity. In England, they will call it something else entirely. Both names will be right. This is the story of the album that told you who they were before you understood what you were hearing. The Commodores, self-titled, March 1977, Motown Records, 9 tracks, produced by James Carmichael and the Commodores, recorded at Motown Recording Studios, Hollywood, California. In the UK and Western Europe, this album was released under a different title, Zoom. Same 9 tracks, different name on the cover, 2 countries, 1 album, 2 different arguments about what they were listening to. There is a tension running through this record that most people missed when it dropped. Listen to where the 2 halves of this band live on the album. Brick House sits in the heart of side 2. It is one of the hardest funk songs of the 1970s. It is built from the bottom up, a bass riff, a groove, a wall of brass. It is a physical song. It demands movement. Walter Orange delivers it like a verdict. And then, a few tracks later, the album ends. The last song you hear is Easy. Easy is the opposite of everything Brick House is. It is a Sunday morning in Alabama wrapped in strings. Lionel Richie sings it like he is already halfway out the door and has not yet decided if he feels relief or loss. The hardest funk of the decade and the softest ballad of the decade, on the same side of the same record, and the band gives Easy the last word. The album does not end on the groove, it ends on the goodbye. In 1977, nobody read the sequencing this way. They were too busy moving to one and feeling the other. But look at it now. The Commodores were not one band, they were 2 bands inside the same name. On this album, the funk band plays through the middle, and the ballad closes the door on the way out. That ending was a clue. Nobody caught it yet. To understand what the Commodores were building in 1977, you have to understand what they came from. They were formed in 1968 at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, 6 students. They started as 2 separate campus bands, the Mystics, with Lionel Richie, Thomas McClary, and William King, and the Jays, with 3 other students. The 2 groups merged. They needed a name. William King opened a dictionary at random and ran his finger down the page. He landed on Commodores. King later told People magazine they almost became the Commodes. They lucked out. They grew up listening to James Brown, Parliament Funkadelic, Sly and the Family Stone, the Ohio Players. This is where the harder end of the Commodores comes from, the raw physical funk that Brick House is built on. But Tuskegee is also a small southern town, and Lionel Richie was carrying something else. When asked about the phrase easy like Sunday morning, Richie explained it directly. Small southern towns die at 11:30 Saturday night. Everything goes quiet. Sunday morning in Tuskegee has a particular stillness. Richie carried that stillness into his songwriting. The Commodores inherited 2 traditions, the electrified black southern funk of James Brown's South Carolina and the quiet Sunday morning of Lionel Richie's Alabama. Both lived in them. The question on every album was which one would speak first. Every major Commodores album from 1974 to 1981 carries the same co-production credit, James Anthony Carmichael. Carmichael is not a household name. He should be. He was a classically trained musician and arranger who came up through the Motown system. For years, he was a staff arranger, shaping the sound of records for the Jackson 5, for Marvin Gaye, for Gladys Knight. He understood the Motown language. He knew how to take a raw idea and build it into a record that would live. But Motown kept him in the arranger's chair. When the Commodores came to him in 1974, he agreed on one condition. He wanted to produce. The Commodores became the first act Motown let him produce. They were still figuring out how to translate their live energy into a studio recording. Walter Orange, the Commodores' drummer and co-lead vocalist, said it plainly. It was James Carmichael who brought our music to fruition. On the 1977 self-titled album, Carmichael handled both production and arrangements. That means he shaped not just what the songs were, but how they sounded. The brass on Brick House, the strings on Easy, the way the album moves between its two modes without feeling like two separate records stitched together. There is a story that tells you something about Carmichael's instincts. When Richie eventually wrote 3 Times a Lady, a waltz, slow and vulnerable, he brought it to Carmichael convinced that Frank Sinatra should have it. It was not a Commodores song. It did not fit who they were. Carmichael disagreed. He told Richie to record it himself. Richie did. It became the Commodores' first #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Carmichael had a gift for knowing what a song was before the person who wrote it understood it. Here is a detail worth sitting with. In the United States, the 1977 album shipped as the Commodores, the self-titled record, a declaration of identity. Here is the band, fully formed in their own name. In the UK and Western Europe, Motown released the same 9 tracks under a different title, Zoom. Same songs, same sequence, different argument. A title is a framing. When the American market called it the Commodores, they were saying, this is who the band is. When the British market called it Zoom, after a song that was never even released as a single in America, they were saying, this is what this record actually is about. America heard Brick House. England called it Zoom. And at the 1978 Grammy ceremony, the Academy could not figure out what to do with either one. It put them together. Easy and Brick House, the Ballad and the Funk Monster, were nominated as a pair for a single award, Best R&B Vocal Performance by a Duo, Group or Chorus. They lost. The award went to The Emotions and Best of My Love, produced by Maurice White of Earth, Wind and Fire. The rival they could not get past on the charts beat them on Grammy night too, and that one is hard to argue with. Best of My Love is still everywhere today, still sampled, still covered. The Academy picked a song that lasted, a single nomination for 2 songs that could not be more different, and not even that was enough. Brick House, one of the most durable funk records ever pressed, and Easy, one of the most covered ballads of its era, shared that slot and walked away with nothing. It was the first of many nights like this. The Commodores would keep getting nominated. They would keep going home with nothing. March 1977. Here is what else is happening. On January 23rd, Roots premieres on ABC. 8 consecutive nights. More than 100 million Americans watched the finale. It is still one of the highest-rated broadcasts in television history. A black family story across generations in primetime for a week straight. The country has never had this before. Jimmy Carter is inaugurated in January. America is still finding its exhale after Watergate, after Vietnam. There is a mood of wanting things to feel quieter, simpler. Fleetwood Mac's Rumors has been at #1 since February. It will spend 31 weeks at #1 on the Billboard 200. Hotel California by the Eagles is on every rock station. These are the records driving album sales. On the R&B chart, the Commodores are competing with Earth, Wind and Fire, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye. Earth, Wind and Fire are their closest commercial rival. The competition between the two bands is documented and real, personal, not just commercial. In May, Star Wars opens on 32 theaters. By November, it is the all-time domestic box office record. Something about the country's appetite for mythology, for scale, for something larger than ordinary life, is shifting. August 16th, Elvis Presley dies at Graceland at 42. Easy is climbing the Hot 100 on its way to #4, the same month Elvis dies. The Commodores are not separate from this moment. They are inside it, putting the hardest funk of the decade and a Sunday morning ballad on the same record during the year America lost its king and found its mythology somewhere in outer space. The commercial story of the 1977 album moves in 2 directions simultaneously. Brick House hits fast. It enters the chart in August and peaks at #5 in October. It becomes immediately and permanently associated with the band's identity in America. Nearly 50 years after it dropped, it is still in every sports arena, every cultural shorthand for 1970s funk. Easy is more patient. It enters in June, peaks at #4 in late August, #1 on R&B. It lands on year-end lists. It ranks #33 on the year-end Hot 100 for 1977. Brick House entered too late to make that list, but Easy keeps accumulating. Covers, samples, film placements, generations of listeners finding it for the first time. Faith No More covered it in the early 1990s and made it a completely different record, and both versions are somehow correct. That is what happens when a song is built around a real feeling rather than a trend. Lionel Richie's Sunday Morning in Tuskegee travels. It has been traveling ever since. What the 1977 album started becomes fully visible only in the years that follow it. The very next year, on Natural High in 1978, the Commodores record 3 Times a Lady. Richie writes it after his parents' 37th wedding anniversary, sitting through his father's toast to his mother and realizing he has never properly thanked his own wife, Brenda Harvey, for what she has given his life and his career. The song Carmichael had to talk him into keeping became the one that moved the Commodores' center of gravity for good. Now look at the arc from 1977 forward. Easy is Richie writing about liberation from pressure, framed as a love song. 3 Times a Lady is Richie writing pure gratitude, framed as a wedding toast. Endless Love in 1981 is Richie writing the biggest ballad of the decade. Hello in 1984 is Richie so far into the ballad mode that the song barely exists as a physical sound. The 1977 album is the first place you can see the transition. Not loudly, not announced, just in the sequencing, the funk band working through the body of the record, and Easy left alone to close it. The funk tradition traveled forward too. The Brick House groove has been sampled and interpolated across hip-hop for decades. It became infrastructure, the kind of record other musicians build on top of because the foundation is so solid. The funk became architecture. The ballad became a career. After the 1977 album, the commercial peak continues. 3 Times a Lady reaches #1 in 1978, still reaches #1 in 1979. Then Richie writes Lady for Kenny Rogers in 1980, and Rogers takes it to #1 for 6 weeks. Richie is now writing chart toppers for other people. In 1982, Richie leaves the band. He is going solo. James Carmichael goes with him. That is the piece of the story that is easy to miss. Carmichael, the man who co-produced every major Commodores album since 1974, the man who arranged Brick House and Easy, the man who told Richie to record 3 Times a Lady. Carmichael follows Richie out the door. Carmichael co-produces Can't Slow Down with Richie in 1983. It wins Album of the Year at the 1985 Grammy Awards. It sells over 20 million copies. Carmichael wins Producer of the Year. The Commodores rebuild without their architect and without their primary voice. They recruit new members. They continue. In 1984, they record Night Shift, a tribute to Marvin Gaye, killed by his father in April 1984, and to Jackie Wilson, who had died in January 1984 after years of decline. Walter Orange, the drummer who delivered Brick House like a verdict back in 1977, writes it with Dennis Lambert and Fran Gold. It reaches #3 on the Hot 100. At the 28th Grammy Awards, February 25, 1986, Night Shift wins Best R&B Performance by a Duo or Group with Vocal. As performers, the Commodores had been nominated 9 times and won nothing. This was #9. This was the one that finally won. Think about what it took. The first Grammy came after Lionel Richie was gone, after James Carmichael, the producer who shaped their sound, had followed him out the door. Brick House never won anything. Easy never won anything. The trophy finally came for Night Shift, a song one of the founding members wrote to mourn 2 singers the era had already taken. Here is the whole record on a single card. Nearly 50 years later, Brick House is still playing in arenas before the home team runs out. Easy is still in films, in covers, in the vocabulary of every songwriter who has tried to write about leaving without bitterness. But the album they came from, the 1977 self-titled record, holds something that both songs alone do not. It holds the moment before the choice was made. America called it the Commodores and heard a funk band. England called it Zoom and heard a ballad act. The Grammys that year heard neither clearly enough to give it anything. Nearly a decade later, after Ritchie was gone and Carmichael had already won with him, after Gaye and Wilson had died, the Commodores got their first Grammy, for a tribute to what the era had cost. The 1977 album was not called a classic when it dropped. They were too busy calling it a hit. Next time on When It Dropped, 1991. A group from Queens takes the low end, the bass, the bottom of the sound the Commodores built from, and turns it into an entire philosophy. A Tribe Called Quest, the low end theory. The album that fused jazz and hip hop for good.